It is week 2, day 1, and today I watched season 1, episode 8 of Frasier, Beloved Infidel. This episode was definitely interesting. There were some funny jokes in there. I specifically like the running joke with Eddie rolling around on the couch and making little noises because he's adorable. But the main plot of the episode is also actually kind of relatable to me. So, Frasier and Niles go out to a restaurant and they see their dad having dinner with a woman who they recognize from their childhood as a family friend. And Niles does some digging and determines that their dad had an affair with this woman 30 years ago. They're upset and they confront their dad, and he says that it's true. And then Frasier struggles with it a lot more than Niles. And then at one point, Frasier comes home, and the woman comes over to apologize for running out and crying because, she just her dad just died, and he's mad at her because she, according to his dad, she was the person that he had an affair with. And then she tells him that it wasn't her and his dad, it was her husband and his mom. And his mom is dead. Has been dead for 6 years, I believe, was what they said in an earlier episode. So Frasier confronts his dad again and asks why he lied, and talks about, trying to preserve the memory of his mom, and because he's got more problems with the dad than with his mom. So they have a very heartfelt conversation, and they make up, and Frasier talks about how his ex-wife cheated on him, and they discover that they have something in common in that both of their wives cheated on them, which is kind of dark, but it happens. But this is kind of a relatable episode for me, because later in, when I was an adult, my dad told me that my mom had cheated on him at one point, and she's been dead a long time. And he never told me who with, but I remember a family friend who I got along with really well, who was an adult, and I also remember he suddenly stopped coming around anymore, and they just never talked about him anymore. And I think I can kind of make a guess as to who it was with. But, I feel like this was pretty relatable because, I didn't struggle with it so much because, everybody's human. We all make mistakes. And it doesn't, tarnish my memory of her at all. It's just a thing that happened. But it's still, something that can cause problems in a family. And I like the part where they talk about how they got through it and moved on and still had a happy marriage, because that's what my parents did. And it was a nice episode, I think. Daphne was mostly the funny one in this episode because everybody else was being very serious. And also Eddie was being very cute. It's week 2, day 2, and today I watched Frasier episode 9, season 1, episode 9, Selling Out. So in this episode, Frasier, it starts out with Frasier in his studio, his radio studio, and he gets some ad copy to read, and he's mad about it because he doesn't do ad copy, because he doesn't want to endorse anything as a psychiatrist, because he doesn't want to abuse people's trust. So they give the ad copy to the sports broadcaster, and it's an ad for a Chinese place. And the sports broadcaster does a very racist impression of a Chinese person and bangs a gong. And thankfully, it's not played as a good or funny thing that he does, which is amazing considering the shit that radio personalities at the time were doing, Rush Limbaugh in particular. But the fact that it still happened and there was still a laugh track over it was very uncomfortable. This episode in particular was very uncomfortable. So what happens is Frasier finds out that the ad copy reads pay out a lot of money. So he's like, oh, well, what should I do, Dad and Daphne? And they say if his problem is with, like, being dishonest, then he should try the place and see if he likes it first. And so he does, and he likes the food, and he starts reading the copy, and apparently that drove up the business of the Chinese place by 30%, and he's very proud of this. But as he's leaving the studio again, he is accosted by the sportscaster's agent. I believe they call him Bulldog. But the agent, I don't remember her name, but she's a twig and probably like 50 and very good at playing a very manipulative asshole. So she goes and she manipulates Frasier into doing more commercials by talking about his son's college and saying like, oh, well, college, have you seen the projections of what college is going to cost in 2010? And, you know, yeah, college tuition has gotten very expensive since the 90s. I mean, it was expensive in the 90s compared to, like, the 70s or whatever. It's risen steadily. And he does a commercial for a hot tub that he tries out first. There's a joke about him not wanting to be seen by a guy from his building, so he goes under the water. He's holding his breath and he goes under the water, and then the scene ends. And that the stinger at the end of the episode is him still under the water, and then he comes up. But the episode continues, and he's cool with the hot tub promo. And then the agent comes around and harangues him again and manipulates him into doing a TV commercial for nuts. And he doesn't like them. Like, he already doesn't like them when she mentions it, because, like, he's tried them before, and he doesn't like them, and they're not healthy. So he initially declines, and then she manipulates him a lot, and it's very awkward, and there's a lot of long pauses where the laugh track is going, and I feel like they just needed filler, because there's not a lot else going on in the episode. So he's in the makeup chair, he's talking to the agent, she gives him the script, and he doesn't like the script, because I believe the line that he has a problem with is, as a psychiatrist, I know a nut when I see one. And fair. I wouldn't like that line either. But he's she keeps manipulating him, and he goes to Niles, and Niles is like, well, you already sold out when you did your radio show. And basically everybody is telling him to go through with it. Oh, and Niles makes more hating his wife jokes, so that's fun. And the next scene, he's watching the commercial, and it seems like he did the commercial, but then it turns out that it's a different psychiatrist in the commercial, and he didn't go through with it. And that's the end of the episode. So, you know, I guess it's about following your gut. I don't know. This episode had a lot of, like, awkward pauses with laugh tracks. Like, they were filling time. And also, the worst, like, racism, ableism, bad things in this episode. I was very uncomfortable most of the time. I want another episode like I Hate Frasier Crane that was actually good, but I have yet to see one. So that's still at the top of my list. I'm thinking at the end of season 1, I'm going to make an episode ranking, and I'm just going to rank all of the episodes in the order that I like them. And currently, season 1, episode 4 is number 1 on the list. And basically every other episode is far below that one. So, yeah, that's it, I guess. It is week 2, day 3, and I watched Frasier season 1, episode 10. Oops. I hate this episode. So that sportscaster, Bulldog, there's a bunch of office gossip that somebody's going to be let go, and the rumor is that it's him. And Frasier tells it to somebody, and he overhears. Bulldog overhears and goes and quits and talks to his boss and gives him he says a lot of insults, like accusing his wife of adultery. So that's a thing. He kisses Roz without her consent and talks about physically fighting with his boss, and then leaves the room saying that he wants to go punch somebody because he's hyped up on adrenaline. And like, I think it's good that he's fired, especially after the last episode. Apparently Frasier's dad really liked him and is sad that he's off the radio, and Frasier admits what he did on accident. And then Bulldog comes to his apartment and is like, hey, I'm fucking depressed. I'll go crash on your couch. And then he acts very violent towards objects, and apparently we're supposed to want him to have his job back. And really, I just want him to go away. So Frasier goes and talks to his boss, who's also an asshole. And his boss says that he put Bulldog's head through the wall, and there's a hole in the wall, so he did. So his boss says that he'll let Bulldog back if he apologizes, and then says, if he kisses my ass, we'll work something out. So that's good. But then he says that the person who is actually going to get fired was Frasier. And then he gets a call and says that he's getting fired. So Frasier's boss gets fired, and Frasier, like, gloats about it over him. And that's the end of the episode. And, you know, I was so focused on the bad stuff going on with Frasier's job that I forgot to mention his brother, who sucks. Makes more hating his wife jokes, and also is, like, subtly racist at one point. Like, they bring in the beginning of the episode, I completely forgot about this until just now. At the beginning of the episode, they're at the coffee shop that they're at a lot, and Frasier brings a bunch of his work friends over to the coffee shop, and one of them is black. And when Niles introduces himself, he does like a black voice or something. I don't remember what he actually said, but I remember it being a microaggression, and the black guy just kind of looking awkwardly at him and then leaving. So, you know, not only does Niles hate his wife, but he's also kind of racist. So great. That's great. I hate these people. That's it. I hate them. It's week 2, day 4, and today I watched season 1, episode 11, Death Becomes Him. This episode wasn't bad, actually. The episode is about Frasier having an existential crisis, I guess? So, he takes his dad to the doctor, and it turns out that the doctor died of a heart attack, and he was Frasier's age. And so Frasier becomes very self-conscious about his life, I guess. And he keeps worrying that he's going to die. He gets his affairs in order. He like gets his family together and gives them all like instructions on what to do in case he dies. He gets an emotional pep talk from his dad, who tells him to just don't think about it. And then eventually he goes to a funeral, the funeral of the doctor. And there's a bunch of jokes about Jewish people in there. And I have to imagine that it's just like Jewish people poking fun at being Jewish and not some anti-Semitic bullshit. Because it seems like there's too much actual information there about Jewish culture to be like anti-Semitic garbage. But he goes to the funeral and everybody's talking about how this doctor guy was super fit and a health nut and doing everything right, never smoked, never drank, never even touched caffeine, and he died of a heart attack. And it's making Frasier feel like really uncomfortable about himself because it feels like he could drop dead at any minute. And then he talks to somebody. I don't remember if it's like the daughter or the wife. I wasn't really paying attention to the screen, I'll be honest. But she asks him what he would say to somebody who couldn't get over a death. And she doesn't know that he's having this problem. So it's kind of a coincidence that she's like, well, I can't get over his death because, you know, he did everything right. He was healthy. He was fit. And he comes up with the answer to his problem by working it out from a psychiatrist's point of view. And like what he would say to a patient who was having the problem that he was having. And I think that was a really clever way to resolve the conflict of the episode, because it's actually using his position as a therapist, as a psychiatrist, to resolve his emotional problem, which doesn't seem to happen too much in this show up until now. So yeah, I thought it was a good episode. I thought it was, it was relatable, because I think everybody has struggled with thoughts of impending death at some point in their lives. So I think it was a very relatable episode. I think it was a good resolution to the episode. I think the episode was well written, and there weren't very many offensive jokes. Although they leaned very heavily in the first half of the episode on Niles still being attracted to Daphne. And I wish they wouldn't, because it's very uncomfortable. Because he'll talk about his wife, and then 5 seconds later he's making gaga eyes at Daphne, and it's just so uncomfortable. Anyway, if I'm thinking about putting this episode at number 2 in my rankings. It's not amazing, and it's not as good as I Hate Frasier Crane, but it's better than most of the episodes that I've seen. So there's that. It's week 2, day 5, and today I watched Frasier, season 1, episode 12, Miracle on 3rd or 4th Street. This is a Christmas episode. So it starts out, Frasier is at work, and there's a Christmas party going on, and he's talking about his Christmas plans because Bulldog wants him to take over on Christmas Day for his spot. Frasier's gonna have his son over all week, and they're gonna go up to a cabin, and they're gonna have some fun Christmas times. He drives a coworker home who is apparently very aggressively flirtatious, a female coworker. So, you know, it's funny because it's a woman making unwanted sexual advances at a man, and that makes it funny. It doesn't make it funny. So Frasier gets home, and he gets in an argument with his ex-wife, and it turns out that he's not going to be able to see his son. And then he gets in an argument with his dad over Christmas lights, and he decides that he's going to actually fill in for Bulldog on Christmas. And so it's Christmas Day, and it turns out that Roz has to work on Christmas Day as well because Frasier decided to work. Because you can't have a call-in show without somebody screening the calls. So Frasier spends these 4 hours of a radio talk show talking to very sad people, because only sad people call into talk shows on Christmas, apparently. And halfway through, he sends Roz home because she's crying, because she's so sad, because everybody's making her sad. And afterwards, he goes to a restaurant, and it's like a cheap diner, because it's the only place that's open and not booked up. And there's a bunch of homeless people also eating there. And he eats his food, and he realizes that he left his wallet at work. And then all of the homeless people decide to pitch in for his meal, which he is initially very resistant to. But then he realizes, and I realize at that time, that he's very disheveled. He's wearing like a sweater and sweatpants. Because I wasn't really watching the episode. I was doing laundry the whole time. I was folding laundry. So he's very disheveled, and all of the homeless people think that he's also like a poor homeless person and is just making up an excuse that he lost his wallet so that he doesn't have to pay. And so all of the homeless people chip in and pay for his meal, and he's very touched by this moment. And one of the homeless people talks to him and is like, you know, the rich get all of the other days for themselves. This is the one day that we get as the poor working class people. And then he goes out and tries to hide that he's getting in an expensive foreign car to go home, and it turns out that he lost his keys. He left his keys in the diner, and that's the end of the episode. You know, I like any piece of media that shows off like how generous poor people generally are, because it's true. Generally, like, the poorer you are, the more you're likely to help other people out with what little you have, and the richer you are, the more you tend to hoard that stuff. At least in my experience. I don't know. It was an okay episode. I'd say it's a distant third on my list. Not terrible. Oh, you know what? No, it actually has to go lower, because I remembered they made some bad jokes that I pushed out of my mind for my own protection. They made a joke about Daphne's uncle being a transvestite. That is the word that they used, and that was bad. I was expecting a joke like this at some point, and I'm glad it was as tame as it was, but it was still not great. And also, there's a part where Niles is making Daphne model dresses, and the pretense is that he's trying to get a gift for his wife. And it's just so uncomfortable. And even the show knows that it's uncomfortable at this point, because there's like a full minute of awkward silence when Frasier realizes what Niles is doing. It's very bad. But speaking of homeless people, did you know that Seattle has the largest homeless population of any other place in the state? Fun fact. That wasn't really a fun fact. It's week 2, day 6, and I watched Frasier season 1, episode 13. Guess who's coming to breakfast? This is a comfortable episode for the most part. Frasier's dad has a date. He invites her over for dinner, and Frasier and Daphne go out to give them privacy, and they're making breakfast in the morning, and Martin's date comes out of his bedroom, and they're making all sorts of, well, Frasier makes all sorts of jokes and slips of the tongue about them having sex, and that's already awkward. And then the woman leaves. Frasier ribs his dad a bit about having sex, and then this is the next, I guess it's that day, and Frasier is at work, and he's answering a call about a woman who's upset that her daughter might be having sex, and he says that maybe she's having trouble seeing her daughter as an adult, and that he had a problem seeing his dad as someone who has sex. And he name drops the woman who he had a date with, Elaine. And everything up until then was, whatever. But he literally says her name on air. And like, oh no, now you've fucking doxed her. So Frasier's dad is obviously pissed, understandably. Elaine won't even talk to him anymore, because like everybody that she knows is hounding her, and she can't even pick up the phone anymore. So Frasier goes, I'm gonna fix this. And the next day he ends his show by doing more of the thing that got him in trouble in the first place. He publicly calls her to come to dinner that night with his dad while playing romantic music on the air. And so, of course, that night, there's a bunch of people gathered around his apartment door because, most of the people who live in his building know who he is and which apartment he lives in. So there's a ton of people outside of his door just watching, and they want to know if Elaine is there and how things are going with her and his dad. And then Elaine gets up on the elevator to their floor and immediately tries to shut the door and leave. And I'm like, yeah, sure, good. But then Frasier and his dad get on the elevator, and Frasier is ordered to turn around and face the corner, while Martin and Elaine have a talk, and Martin is like, I'm sorry things happened, and it's okay if you don't want to see me anymore, but it would really suck if this came between us, because I really like you and we had fun. And that's really nice. But Frasier also did something bad, and I guess his punishment is that he has to stand in the corner. But they make up, and the next shot is of the elevator opening back on their floor, and Elaine and Martin are making out. And all of the people in front of their apartment start cheering and applauding. And then Frasier disperses them and sends them home. And then the episode ends with sexual tension between Frasier and Daphne, I guess. There's a joke about it being Saturday night or something, and they're both single and they could go out on a date or something. And then it turns out that Daphne was talking about laundry, and Frasier was talking about a date or sex. I don't know which. I'm going to assume date just for my own sanity, because that makes it less bad. Don't date your employees, please. She's your employee. She works at your apartment, pretty much. She's basically a live-in maid. Anyway, there's more Niles and Daphne bullshit. In the beginning of the episode, Niles and Daphne are in the kitchen, and Niles tries to sit up on the island, but he hits his head on, like, the overhead, like, vent or whatever. And then he's on the floor, and Daphne, like, starts rubbing his head, and she's like, "Can you walk?" And he goes, "Well, I think I should stay down here for a while." And then Frasier comes in and yells at him, because he should. Because fuck Niles. My least favorite character. It's week 2, day 7, and I watched Frasier episode 14 of season 1, Can't Buy Me Love. So, I thought I was gonna hate this episode, and I did at first. The premise is that it's like a friend of Martin is having a bachelor auction. One of those events where women pay to have dates with celebrities. I don't think I've heard of one actually happening recently, but I have heard of it happening. So he invites Frasier and Bulldog as radio celebrities. Which is like, why would you use a radio celebrity? Anyway, they make a lot of jokes about, like, unwanted sexual advances, but it's men being ogled and touched by women, and that makes it okay, right? It's real bad. And at the end of the auction, Frasier gets paired up with a supermodel, and Bulldog gets paired up with Daphne, because he's the last one up, and nobody is bidding. She's told to bid to get the ball rolling, and she's the only bid. So she ends up going on a date with Bulldog. Frasier gets ready for his date at his home with this model, and it turns out that she has a job that she has to do that came up at the last minute, and the person who was supposed to watch her daughter also got called to the same job. So she leaves her daughter with Frasier, and her daughter is your typical 90s sitcom teen. So she talks on the phone a lot and eats junk food and overfeeds the dog and says "no way" on the phone over and over again. And meanwhile, Daphne is in a limo with Bulldog, and she's super drunk. And I guess the implication is supposed to be that he's getting her drunk so that he can, do bad things. But she starts insulting him, and he's, like, kind of taking it in stride, but she calls him, like, short and dumb, pretty much, but it's, like, it's jokes. It's very clever jokes, but it's still calling him short and dumb, which, you know what? He deserves it. Fuck that guy. I actually very much enjoyed him getting the piss taken out of him by Daphne, especially after the first scene where they interact, because he slaps her on the ass. Unasked. No consent there. But anyway, there's some people honking outside their limo, and Daphne starts shouting at them. Oh, they're going to a Sonics game. It's a basketball game. Which, is there really that much traffic going to a Sonics game? Come on. There's a reason that team went under. But he's a sportscaster, so they have to figure out some sporting event that he's going to take her to. Anyway, she's shouting at some guys honking and insulting them, and they come up to the limo, and she's like, "They're not gonna hurt a woman." And then Bulldog gets pulled out of the other side of the limo. And I guess they don't show it, but I guess the implication is that he's getting his ass kicked, which is great because again, he deserves it. And then the limo starts moving without him in it, and so it just leaves him behind, and Daphne's still in the back, drunk off her ass on champagne, and she's just fine with it. And then cut back to the Crane household, and Frasier is talking to Renata, I believe her name was, the daughter, and she's telling him all of this horrible stuff that her mom does, and she eventually gets picked up by her mom, and they're gonna do their date thing, and Frasier goes, "Well, I know all of the horrible things that you do to your daughter," and like yells at her about it. And she's like, "No, I don't do any of that. She was lying because she's mad at me because she wanted to stay home by herself and I wouldn't let her." And I feel like this just reinforces a harmful view of children where you just don't believe anything that they say, because that's what the moral of the story seems to be implying, is that you shouldn't believe when children say that their parents do bad things. Now that's not great. But she's mad at him and she leaves. And then he's like, "Well, I hope my son doesn't grow up to be a shithead." And you know what? He's rich, so probably he will be. Good job. So that's the end of week 2. I didn't really talk about my physical therapy all that much because there wasn't much to say about it. I did my stretches, and if I didn't do my stretches, I was doing something else physical, like cleaning my room or doing laundry or other stuff like that. So that's gonna be it. If you like the Frasier Diaries, you should subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Soundcloud and share this stuff with your friends. That's the best way that you can support this project, is by sharing it around, because word of mouth is pretty much the only way I can even afford to advertise this shit. There should be links in the description wherever you're watching this, listening to this, so check me out on wherever, and I'll see you next week on the Frasier Diaries.